Good evening. So I'm a behavioral scientist, and tonight I want to tell you a story. Imagine a country which is a big producer of oil, which, by the way, is a limited product. This country has to provide oil for all inland consumers, which is important. This determines the welfare of the consumers and eventually the welfare of the population. Imagine now that out there is a market which is made by private entities which are driven by the goal of making money out of the oil trading. Our country will have to face a big dilemma, whether to use internal local oil or whether to access to the international market and try to get oil for the consumers from external sources. The solution to this dilemma looks quite obvious. Indeed, each use of internal oil, local oil, will have a long-term cost for all consumers. Instead, if this country implements a policy of importing oil from external sources, this will increase on the long term the survival of the consumers, so having a benefit for the population. Now, the example I just made is not the introduction to a TED talk in geopolitics. It is instead the introduction to genetics. The producers, in this case, are the parents, and in particular, the mom, according to the example I will talk about tonight. The consumers are the offspring, newborn individuals of our species, which I will define altricial, which means that their survival depends very much on the caregiver, at least for some period of time after birth until weaning. But this, in brief, is also an introduction to a framework of an evolutionary theory proposed by David Haig, an evolutionary biologist at Harvard, who states that mom is very much focused in maximizing the survival of all offspring. And therefore, what she will try to do is to budget as much as possible all her resources, and so that she can invest more in all offspring. And in doing that, she will use different strategies. One of these strategies might be the anticipation of weaning, so that she can save some resources and get dad more involved in the care of the offspring. From a recent lecture titled A Tale of Two Mothers, we can make few considerations, few observations, but just looking at the reproductive strategies of female chimpanzees versus women of our species. Indeed, if you look at this graph, female chimpanzees give birth quite early in life, at the age of 12, 15, and they can reproduce until the end of their life with almost no post-reproductive period. If you think about, basically this species occupy most of the lifetime for reproduction. Moreover, chimpanzees wean quite late in life. They wean at the age of 5, orangutan even later at the age of 7, 8. And a female chimpanzee won't become pregnant again until the previous offspring is not fully independent. Instead, if we look at our species, we can see that women give birth quite late in life, an average of age of 20, but even later this changed across different cultures. And we have a very long post-reproductive period. Humans can wean quite early instead, and we wean at the age of 2, 3, so that basically we have multiple births quite close to each other. And this is a good strategy in order to use only a small segment of our lifetime dedicated to reproduction. So what is all this telling us? Well, first of all, it tells us that we are a species compared to other great apes that is capable of weaning immature offspring, individuals that are not fully developed yet. And if you think about this, mirrors exactly the way our society is organized. Indeed, women can delegate the care of the offspring to fathers, to grandparents, to nurseries, quite often to a combination of all these. And this has some advantages. For example, as I said before, we can use only a small segment of our life for reproduction. But this allowed also to carry multiple offspring at the same time. However, this has some potentially disadvantages for the offspring. Indeed, this increases the level of the risk for the offspring. And what I will argue in a moment, that when this is matched with particularly genetic factor, might have negative consequences in life. But back to biology, which are these genetic factors? Where there are specific genes which regulate all these mechanisms. And what I would like to do tonight is to talk about a particular class of genes called imprinted genes. What is genomic imprinting? Genomic imprinting is an epigenetic phenomenon which regards only a small set of genes. And in this particular case, it sets on and off only one copy of a gene, either if this copy is inherited from the maternal line or if the copy is inherited from the paternal line. And in some cases, the maternal copy is silenced, so that that gene is paternally expressed. In other cases, it's the paternal copy that is silenced, that gene is maternally expressed. So these genes are differentially expressed in different parts of our organism. For example, they are highly expressed in the placenta, and interesting enough for us that we study behavior, they are highly expressed in the brain. But why are so important? Well, we know that imprinted genes are extremely important during development. They regulate, for example, growth, neurodevelopment, but they're also important for the setting of many behavioral aspects early in life, and also for many metabolic aspects. For example, imprinted genes are important in regulating the capability of the offspring to take resources from the mother, and also they participate in the regulation of the interbirth interval. So the interval between distant birth is extremely important. Indeed, if you are an offspring, this tells you how long your mom will be able to invest in you before you will be sharing resources with the next offspring. And trust me on this, indeed I was last in line in my family, so I know this very well. But besides all these aspects, we know that genomic imprinting plays an important role, we just discovered recently, in one of the most mysterious aspects of our life, which is still not fully understood, and this is sleep. In my lab, we discovered that a few imprinted genes regulate one specific form of sleep, which is called REM sleep. So what is REM sleep? REM is a physiologically active form of sleep in which our eyes move very fast and in which we experience dreaming. But it turns out that REM is also very important during development. And in particular, if you look at the developmental phase, we see that the predominant state in this phase is sleep. More than 95% of the time of a fetus is spent asleep. And also after birth, newborns spend most of their time in sleep. And all this sleep is made by REM sleep, which is also important for reproductive success later in life. Indeed, if we block REM sleep during development, we might lead to sexual dysfunction and to brain dysfunctions, all sorts of conditions which reduces the reproductive opportunity for the individual. But we know that REM is also extremely important for the establishment of many behavioral aspects during early life. And what I will argue tonight, that is important for attachment. My friend Patrick McNamara, professor at Boston University, back in 2004, predicted that genomic imprinting was important for sleep, and also that sleep is important in setting the bonding between the newborns and the mother. He suggested that REM sleep could be profound effects in reinforcing the attachment with the caregiver. And there are quite few research evidence showing this and going in this direction. For example, we know that REM increases when the newborns co-sleep with the mothers. Conversely, REM decreases during maternal separation. And there are several mechanisms along with the sleep and with lactation which dictate the time for the next birth of an offspring. Also, we know that REM sleep changes across different species, and it seems to be strongly correlated with the altriciality of a species. So the greater is the immaturity of a species, the longer the time they spend asleep. For example, ferrets, which are born in a quite immature state, they have almost 30% of their sleep in REM, while more precocial species like horses, they spend only 20% of their sleep time in REM, and humans were just in between, both in terms of altericality and expression of REM sleep. So, but what's going on in the brain during REM sleep? Well, a number of things going on in the brain and outside the brain when we enter REM sleep. During this physiological state, we lose, for example, the control of our body temperature. So it's a sort of going back in evolution down to the reptile lineage, if you wish. But there are also many brain areas which are activated during REM sleep. And one of these is the amygdala. Amygdala is an extremely important structure for our brain. It provides us the capability to process emotions. And when you are a child, this is extremely important. It provides you the right infrastructure to understand if the environment around you is safe or not, whether it is chaotic or is predictable. And it has been shown that if the local environment during the first year of life is not stable and predictable, this might have dramatic consequences for the developmental trajectories of the individual, so affecting the rest of our life. So all this brings us to the next topic, which motivated part of our research over the last few years. And particularly, what we wondered was what's going on when we change genetic background. And we discovered that a particular combination of maternal and paternal genes affects the expression of REM sleep, but also the interaction between the newborns and the mother. And what I will argue here that influenced the development of particular attachment style. What we did in these experiments is to subject newborn mice to an unfamiliar female and later to the mom. And we study how they react when they explore the unfamiliar environment and then during the reunion. And what we understood is that a particular set of maternal and paternal genes influence this behavior, in particular responsible of which attachment style the mouse will develop, whether we'll have a secure attachment or an insecure attachment. And most important, this influences also the behavior as adult. Indeed, those mice which develop an insecure attachment later in life will interact less and less with other conspecifics, so showing a sort of a social impairment. So all I told you today brings us to some important consideration. First of all, that humans are not fully dedicated to reproduction. We are not mandatorily committed to just pass our genes on to the next generation. We surely respond to this evolutionary need, but we have organized also our life with plenty of time to develop other activities. And not all of these activities are engaged in specific evolutionary programs. Compared to other primates, we extended our post-reproductive period, but we also extended our juvenile period. And in particular, during this extended juvenile period, we invest lots of resources in preparing ourselves for adult life. This is called education, which occurs generally in families, but also mostly in a social context. And we also create a specialized organization for that, which are called school. Another important consideration we can take from here, that we are a species that is capable of sharing the responsibility of the safety of our children within the social context. And all these aspects are extremely important, and they should improve the quality of our life. So the next question is this what's really happening? Unfortunately, things don't go always in this direction. For example, psychological suffering represents a tremendous burden for our society. It has been estimated that 350 million individuals suffer from depression around the world, and depression in some cases might lead to suicide. It has been estimated that 800,000 individuals every year commit suicide, an average of one individual every 40 seconds. And psychological suffering is caused not only by depression, but also, for example, by personality disorders. 10% of US population suffers personality disorders. And those are disorders which affect not only the individual, but also families, the partner, the social context, and even the working environment. So if you wish, it's a sort of epidemic effect across the society. In a recent study, it has been estimated that 20% of individuals who have a high-risk infancy can account as adults for 80% of the economic burden for our society. In conclusion, what I told you today adds a biological factor to the link between our physiology and behavior early in life and our adult life. The idea I want to pass to you is that we are suited to get the best out of our life. We can develop a proper physiology and behavior that maximize our interest across life. But what I also told you, that in the equation between early life and adult life, there is a new entry that we should take seriously in consideration, and this is sleep. In particular, I talked to you about REM sleep. What I also told you that there are specific genes that regulate all this mechanism, and in particular, I mentioned the imprinted genes. The problem raised when we increase the risk for our individuals, and high-risk conditions usually occurs when the individual is vulnerable. For example, soon after birth, when our physiology and our behavior are not fully developed, at that stage we are particularly vulnerable. So if something goes wrong at that stage, the consequences are dramatic for the individual, but also for the rest of the society. However, the good news is that we are making great progresses in understanding these risk factors. We do constantly research in trying to understand how genetics and external factors influence our biology, but also mental health. So our ultimate goal as a scientist will be to provide a complete understanding of the genetics of our physiology and behavior. And hopefully, this will reduce dramatically the global psychological suffering of the population, but also will reduce the burden for our economy. Thank you.